So now, Steve Fowler, SVP Publisher 2020, will tell us the overview of how world-class publishers are organized in 2020. So, Steve, you are welcome.
Great. Thank you very much. I can't see into the audience, so I assume there are people there. Let me go ahead and start by giving you a bit of a background on myself and our company, because it's relevant, I think, to the discussion. So I've been in video game marketing and publishing for 24 years, working for big companies like Microsoft on the original Xbox, Sega Sammy, most recently at Blizzard, and before that at ArenaNet. And what I've seen is a major transition that I want to highlight in this discussion. And that revolves around the implications of when digital distribution became the norm for getting games to gamers. When I first started, the primary way gamers got games were at retail. And so game development studios would take years to make a big blockbuster AAA game. They would, just about when they're done, hand it over to the marketing and publishing team to build a campaign to launch that game. And then the game would go on a shelf at retail. About 2010, 2011 is when digital distribution really became a legitimate way to get games to gamers. And no longer were gamers required to get in their cars or other transportation and go to their local game retailer. They could just go on their computer or on their mobile device or on their PC and download a full version of the game. And that radically changed lots of things. It radically changed the way games were developed, and games as a service became a thing. Games with live ops teams that were constantly creating new content and updating the games. But also on my end of the spectrum, it radically changed the way we marketed games. And that's where I want to begin here, is talking a little bit about that. And back in 2010, 2011, I worked for a company called Eisenberg, and I helped create a sub-brand, which is called the A-List Games. And we're a publisher of sorts. And so the reason I was intrigued back in 2010 was because of this digital distribution change and how it might change the way I as a marketer operate and my teams as marketers operate. And I was curious enough that I started to look at other industries and look for corollaries or similarities of transitions that other industries have gone through. The one that was most interesting to me, because it's very similar to ours, is the movie, TV, film industry. And so back in the 50s, in the United States at least, there was the introduction and broad acceptance in homes of television. Up until this point, the way that consumers experienced motion pictures, movies, or moving entertainment on screens was through theaters. And so there was a large industry, Hollywood being the epicenter, that was formed around getting film distributed to in-person theaters. And the associated way to promote those films birthed the marketing and publishing of Hollywood studios. And the way that most of those movies and TV films were marketed are actually very similar to the ways AAA blockbuster games were marketed early in my career. And the introduction of television flipped all that on its head. Now the film Hollywood industry had competitors, from a device that sat in a person's home that could instantly broadcast moving pictures into the house. And the way that the television industry went about that is very different than the way the film industry went about it. Some of the things that I had through my research, as I was reading anything and everything I could find around how movie studios and film and television studios operated, there came down to very stark differences, which I think are very similar to the differences we're experiencing in the games industry now. The television industry had some advantages. Obviously, they had the ability to broadcast directly to your house. But they were also doing things differently. They were creating episodes rather than a single self-contained experience like a movie where you sit down for an hour or 2 hours and watch a beginning, middle, and an end, and then there's completion. Television was taking a more episodic approach where they would release episodes, maybe weekly, and that created a difference in the way that the marketers and publishers needed to think about it. For the most part, television was free. This was prior to cable, so over-air transmission through your antenna. They didn't have an upfront cost to the consumer, so that changed the way that marketers thought as well. They weren't trying to necessarily sell a ticket like the film industry was trying to do. And the way that the television industry thought about getting products to viewers, so TV shows to viewers, was very different. They would go for a pilot strategy where they would spend some amount of money to get one episode created and then test it in front of audiences to see what the reaction was. Where the film industry, they might have done a little bit of testing, but when the film was done, it was being released and it was being launched. And so in essence, the TV industry was a service-based industry. And for the most part, film can be looked at as a product-based industry. The TV industry was able to do things like go after smaller niche markets or genres. So you had sci-fi and comic type of, more comedy type of shows, or game shows, live action, that sort of thing, where the film industry didn't do this and mostly was revolving around big blockbuster releases. And so I like to equate the film industry very similarly to AAA console game industry as it currently exists now. The film marketing companies, the studios themselves, their marketing teams operated with these kind of philosophies in mind. For the most part, they were working with very compressed marketing calendars, where leading up to a film's release, there would be a great deal of spending and marketing in a very compressed time frame to basically blanket the market or take up all of the share of voice of impressions in a market and push out their message to their customers. This would happen over a series of weeks and then be done, right? The movie would come out, it would have a life cycle of a few weeks in theaters, and then the movie industry would be on to the next movie, right? And the biggest, most important tentpole asset that could be created was the trailer, the preview for the film, which would then be cut up into lots of different pieces, including maybe a television spot to promote it. And they would spend heavily on paid media, mostly television advertising, to try to pull eyeballs away, because that was a in-home device that could show moving pictures. And they were very focused on a broad reach, so the most amount of impressions that they could put out in a shortest amount of time. They had very little ability to measure success, and so a lot of the way that the marketing companies at Hollywood studios would work is through gut or through prior consumer research. There was not a lot of small spending, iterative testing, A/B testing, and optimization, because the time frames to get the most impressions were so compressed. They would focus a little bit on the ability to get editorial outlets to cover and do reviews or previews on the films. Some amount of outdoor advertising was also important, with one sheets or print advertising. And then they would always try to, as the call to action, get customers to get up out of their houses, buy a ticket, and go sit in a theater. And so thus they were trying to do a mass market campaign with very little targeting. Shifting to television, I equate the television marketing campaigns from the television studios to be much more similar to the way we in the video game industry are thinking about games as a service. I have a game that I worked on at the last company I worked for called Fox Next, which is a mobile, probably the #1 mobile game in the Marvel IP, called Strike Force, as an example that I can point to. I'll show you a little case study here about how we did marketing for the Marvel Strike Force release and then sustaining campaign. But television marketing teams thought about the way they go about marketing differently than film. A lot of what they were doing were what we call pull versus push marketing. So they would create content, and hope for and allow for customers to go out and search for and find that content, rather than spending great amounts of money to mass market or broadcast. They would have the, due to the nature of TV being episodic, these marketing teams had the luxury of time. No longer were they required to blanket a market in a very short weeks or a multiple weeks window. They had a season to market their products, and thus could do lots of things that were unique that we'll talk about here that movie marketing companies couldn't do. And so what they could do is, if a person watched an episode, one of the most important assets they had as a marketing team at the end of that episode was to preview next week's episode, to build up hype and excitement and suspense, and to broadcast mostly what their message was, which is come back next week and watch the next episode. And so they didn't have to spend as much on this mass market, buying huge television campaigns or outdoor billboards. They were much more focused on getting repeat viewership. And so retention became a marketing tactic, where in the movie industry, that really wasn't something that was thought of at all. Retention in the fact that I need to create fandom or communities around seasons, around series of television, and broadcast messages that are not just get yourself to a theater today, but are, hey, there's new interesting content that's coming in this episode next week. Stay tuned, tune in next week to see what's happening. And so because of this great deal of time that these marketing companies had the ability to do, they could take a more analytics-driven approach. There was something in the United States called the Nielsen system, which was, in essence, ratings. And so Nielsen was able to put devices in people's homes throughout the United States, and those devices would broadcast back to the television networks who and how many families were actually tuning in and watching different episodes. And so you could get data as a television marketer on how well your television show was being viewed, whether it's bigger or smaller one week to the next, see if it's growing audiences or losing audiences, and make really interesting, informed decisions on the way that you market it going forward. And so you could focus a lot on understanding what content to create, and then using digital channels as well as the internet took off kind of in the 90s to be able to use alternative medias to broadcast your message out. And of course, the intent was to drive repeat views. And so you could go after smaller markets, more targeted markets, and based on your television film, could use the genre of the television to help look for other outlets where fans might exist. So if you know that your television show is a sci-fi show, you can go out and target very specifically other media or other outlets that are also where sci-fi fans congregate. So I want to show you how this kind of comes together. We have this cute little comic book case study here that I'll walk you through a bit. This might be a little bit hard to read, so I'll talk you through it a bit. But this is a culmination of all of the way that our marketing and publishing team worked at Fox Next to build the brand and build the audience and sustain the game on mobile for Marvel Strike Force. And so what you'll notice in these panels is at the bottom left of each one of them, it'll list the different vertical divisions within the publishing and marketing for Fox Next that were a part of that part of the campaign. And then in the top right of each of these panels, we've defined a customer segment that we were trying to target with that. And so you'll see things like awareness. Obviously, at the beginning of a campaign, we're interested in getting people that have never heard of Marvel Strike Force aware that we exist. And so as an example in this case study, one of the luxuries of having a Marvel IP licensed product is that Marvel has a built-in fan base of hundreds of millions of people. And so as a part of the licensing agreement we have with Marvel, we have the ability to leverage that audience. And so one of the things that we did, and this specifically was for the release of Captain Marvel in our game. And so we timed this release, obviously, for when the movie came out to try to maximize on buzz and excitement. And so when we first introduced Captain Marvel into Marvel Strike Force, we worked with our friends at Marvel to get them to do social media on our behalf and announce that she was going to be entering our game. And so as an example, a consumer that hasn't heard of Marvel Strike Force but is a Marvel fan went to Marvel's Facebook page and saw this post from them and thought, wow, that's interesting. Let's take a look at this game. They click through that ad and come to our social websites, and maybe they watch a video, maybe they talk to their friends about it, maybe they go to our app page. And so now we're moving this customer from being aware to beginning to consider us. And so this phase is important. After a customer is aware your product exists, you need to do a lot of work to convince them that you're worth their time. And so we at FoxNext spent a lot of time thinking through tactics and executions and strategies to drive consideration and intent to download. And so those were a lot of content creation, so video assets and really well put together social media channels, having communities that we're engaging with and having our community teams talk on those social media channels. Eventually that customer is interested enough and says, you know what, let me go check out this game. And they click through to our App Store page, which is the top right panel that you're looking at now. We've moved them deeper into the consideration funnel, and now they're one step away from installing our game. And so the great thing about app stores on both Google and Apple devices is they're basically sales pages. So you can, as a customer, look at screenshots and watch videos and read reviews from other people. In this case, our customer here, Joe, decides it's not for him yet, and he puts down his phone. At some point later, maybe a day later, or maybe later that afternoon, he's browsing on his phone and gets served an ad from us. Of course, we have the ability to do retargeting with our user acquisition campaigns. And so since he's expressed interest in our game, we have had a ability to use ad network algorithms or Facebook algorithms to know that he is in the consideration phase and is potentially close to being ready to install and download the game. So he's convinced, he downloads, he installs, he starts to go into the original tutorial, the first few moments of the game, and he begins playing. And so you can continue, as I'm talking about this, looking at the bottom left, you can see how the different divisions of FoxNext play into this. So we've got brand marketing and community folks, and we've got our platform relations team that helped us get that maybe featuring out of Apple. We've got our marketing art team that's creating all the beautiful assets. Our user acquisition team is firing on all cylinders, providing these ads. Our game design team has really fine-tuned that Fatui, that new user experience. And he starts to play. Let's say, though, in his kind of first few moments or hours in the game, he gets a trigger because he's completed the new player tutorial. The game actually will automatically serve up our first in-game offer. And so he, once finished with the beginner's tutorial, is offered the beginner's package, which is a great value, probably the best value in the game, right? And this is something that the live ops team has been working on and fine-tuning. When should that pop-up happen? What should it be priced with? How should it be introduced? How should it be communicated? So Joe is continuing to play. This is a few days later. He's picked it back up. We've got him past the first day. He's logging back in, but he finds out that he hasn't, for whatever reason, believed he's gotten a payout that he's deserved. And so Joe's frustrated. As an active player, up on the top left there, you'll see as we've moved this customer through the different segments, he takes to the internet. He goes and looks for forums, or he looks at our social media channels, and he lodges a complaint. Our community team sees that complaint and reaches out to him directly and says, you know, we've got a great customer service team that can help you with this. You know, please log into the game. You can communicate directly in the app with our customer service team, which is a great advantage that we have, is our ability to directly communicate within the gameplay and within the game. And so we figure out what his complaint is. We figure out how to solve his problem. He's now back in and up and running in the game, and is having a lot of fun with the game. and decides that, you know, he likes the game enough, he's going to share with his friends. And so he goes onto his social channels. Maybe he likes, or he shares out, or he tweets, or he retweets. In this case, we're looking at a YouTube channel in the bottom left there. And now Joe's become an evangelist for us. Even though he's not a professional influencer, every single customer nowadays, every gamer has their own ability to broadcast on your behalf, become an influencer, even if it's a micro influencer for your game. And so our community team is providing tools for that. Our marketing art team is creating assets that are hopefully shareable and that they like, and that makes him proud to be a Marvel Strike Force player. And then finally, we've got him hooked. He's a regular player. He's joined an alliance. He's logging in and playing every day. We call him a regular, in fact. And eventually he makes his first purchase in the game. We call him a regular customer. And so all of these different facets that go into the publishing, operation, development of Marvel Strike Force are a demonstration of how game publishers have evolved. Back from when I was at Microsoft working on Halo, which is a AAA $60 purchase at retail, to the way that these companies now, including Fox Next and other companies, are operating, is a much more holistic approach, a much more integrated approach, where in the past, game developers were somewhat disconnected from the marketers and publishers, and worked in a silo as they developed the game. And then, you know, a few months prior to the release, they would kind of throw it over the wall to the marketing team, and the marketing team would put together a campaign and launch the game. But now, because these games are run as services, because they have long life cycles, we hope that, you know, Marvel Strike Force lasts for years and years. There is a requirement to be a highly functional game publisher in 2020, that there is an integration. And in fact, the teams at Fox Next, there's almost no delineation anymore between who is a marketer, who is a game developer. My teammates that were working on the publishing team physically were co-located with their appropriate game developers, whether it was a community manager that sat arm in arm with the game design team, or a CS, customer service manager, who sat right across a cubicle from the QA team. You name it. There was a highly integrated way that these different specialists would work, integrated into one fully functional publisher that is, I think, exemplary of how game publishing is, at least the top performing game publishers are operating, and how I think it's going to even continue and proliferate into more companies. And so I think there's three main components here that I want to drill down just a little bit more in. One is this holistic approach to customer engagement. And so in that case study that I shared with you there, we talked about these different segments that customers can be in, from unaware of your product, to aware but needing convincing to install, to ready for install. I'm going to share with you what I've identified and what my teams have operated against, which I've defined 6 different customer segments that we are constantly thinking about when marketing and publishing games, and constantly evaluating, analyzing, looking at data, experimenting with new tactics to try to drive ROI positive incremental increases in. I think it's also critical, this second bullet here, that integration is something that's wholly accepted and practiced. I talked about our teams physically being located with development teams. I think that this is a requirement now in games as a service, that publishing is not a separate, disconnected unit, that as much as possible they're working hand in hand and are partners in the process and are part of every decision-making process. So the live ops teams, which are typically development folks that are deciding what content or features to put next in the game, are at inception conferring with, discussing, and analyzing those ideas with the corresponding publishing team, who can be more the voice of the customer, the voice of the player. But the addition of now data in the way that we publish in marketing has been a revolutionary change, where there was very little of that in the AAA kind of fire and forget marketing of the early 2000s or 1990s. Now there are massive amounts of data that we can be measuring on a marketing and publishing side, and that can be overwhelming, but it also can be very empowering. And so it's about finding the right data point for the right tactic and figuring out how to action against that without being overwhelmed by that data. To talk about data a little bit more, I wanted to share with you that first idea of the 6 customer segments. So this is by no means revolutionary, but it is a process that's worked for me at the different publishing teams that I've managed, where we look at 6 customer segments. We've labeled them here as awareness, or people that have never heard of us, to consideration, which were those guys that maybe have heard of Marvel Strike Force but haven't yet decided to install. And then there's the people that are ready. They just need that tipping point moment to click the button, download, install, and start playing the game and becoming an active player. Hopefully we keep those active players playing daily and eventually liking the game well enough to spend money. And then even more importantly, later on, liking the game so much that they want to share with their friends and becoming an evangelist for the game. Finally, we're also interested in, for whatever reason, people, if they no longer play or quit or leave the game or forget about the game, what are the tools and what are the measures we have at our disposal to try to get them back, especially if they're important players to the game, if they were regular players, if they had spent money in the game, if they were valuable customers. How do we figure out what was the trigger to make them leave, and then what would be the triggers to bring it back? And so our publishing teams actually action these 6 customer segments through data dashboards. So in Fox Next, there are big screens on the walls in the publishing and marketing areas that have 6 macro dashboards that display data for each of these 6 segments. And so we took a lot of time and effort to define what are the single most important KPI to measure for awareness, for consideration, for conversion, and thus and so on. And so that middle row here of measurement is that. So for instance, for Marvel Strike Force, we believe that measuring aggregate impressions and share of voice versus our target competitive set was the single most important data point to look at on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. And so we would pipe in any and all data sources that we could to show total impressions, whether that was impressions generated from an editorial article, impressions that are on our own social channels, impressions generated from our user acquisition, advertising spend. These would be charted, and our folks on our team could look at every day how it went up or went down. And it was less about what the actual number of impressions were. It didn't matter if it was, we did 10 million impressions yesterday. It was more about looking for trends and changes. And so if today we're 30% higher on impression count than we were yesterday, what we wanted that to do is to have people on our team ask really important questions about why. Why did that impression count go up? And then drill down from that question, finding the source and doing basically a mini case study of what caused that source. Was it something that we control? Is it something we want to happen again or to not happen again? And how do we get better at creating that one action to happen again or not happen again? And so each of the different teams within the marketing and publishing team would be interwoven into each of these 6. And so brand marketing would be involved in almost all of these things. And user acquisition would be involved up until the conversion portions of this, where it kind of then turns over to the community teams and the platform relation teams and the marketing art folks to keep players active and evangelizing. And then lifecycle marketing, or CRM, really is important to create regularity, to get repeat logins, and eventually, if people leave, to convince them to come back. Getting a little bit more granular on this, what we did is we actioned and built these dashboards and pulled as many data sources that were humanly possible to try to create these sources of answers, if you will. And so without getting into too much detail here, if you look down under the supporting metrics for each of these 6 areas, these are the actual data sources that we would either do API connections to our data visualization tool, or do simple Excel downloads or CSV tables that would be put into an Amazon storage bucket or S3 or Google Cloud storage bucket, and then built dashboards and automated processes to pull this data and have it be displayed on dashboards in a human consumption type of way. So visuals that a non-data scientist would understand, a marketer would be able to understand and be able to action against, and then create cause and effect where we would look at, from awareness to consideration, how will we know if we're doing better, right? So what we're measuring in awareness is every single impression we can possibly measure, but in consideration, we're more interested in the quality impressions that are from all of those impressions. So how do we define quality? We're looking for things that indicate engagement. So of all those impressions, were there any actions taken by people? Did they share it? Did they click on it? Did they watch a video? How long did they watch a video? So on and so forth. And so we would measure these things wherever we could, and we try to maximize the amount of data sources that were put, but then simplify that data into one understandable chart that is the main kind of North Star, if you will, for each of these 6 categories. So let's talk a little bit here. I got about 10 minutes more on this discussion. I want to talk about the different functional areas within what I think a world-class publisher should be comprised of now in the games as a service world. And so generally, here are kind of the different divisions that that I am used to working with, whether it was at Fox Next, my last job, or prior to that, I was running publishing at Blizzard for the Hearthstone brand. And these are the way we thought about building out teams that had specialists on them specific to different groups. But again, if you remember from the beginning of my talk, these are not isolated groups. There's quite a bit of overlap and integration deeper into the development teams. And so while we label these different divisions with their own unique labels, they're not as clearly defined as they once were, I think, in the earlier kind of games as products type of world in publishing and marketing. And so we think about brand marketing, brand marketers. These are core folks who are generally kind of the closest relationship with the development teams. They are the ones that are in most of the meetings when it comes to design, trajectory, what major features are going to be added to the game, or if the game hasn't launched yet, deeply understanding what the vision of the game director is, and kind of trying to figure out how to translate that game vision into communication that would resonate with customers. And so they're coming up with marketing strategies and communication strategies, customer segmentation for how to communicate, and really trying to simplify a very complex game's massive amount of features into a few features that can be highly effective at driving whatever actions we want from customers. And so usually the teams that are under brand marketing will also have under their purview agency relationship management. So if you need help externally, if you don't have resources to do whatever marketing effort you need from your own internal publishing and marketing teams, these are the folks that are out working with external sources, advertising agencies or PR agencies, to help get those executions done. In the mobile world, UA, user acquisition, is extremely important. It's fairly rare now for a mobile game app to virally break out. Most success now is driven through highly analytical performance user acquisition teams, and the Fox Next team was no different. The great thing about mobile, at least currently, is that there is a massive amount of information that you can garner in your marketing spending, and there are very sophisticated platforms that allow you to get the right message in front of the right person at the right time, and using machine learning or algorithms in these platforms like Facebook to really be able to measure ROI down onto the user level in performance and user acquisition, advertising, and spending. Now, that is very soon radically going to be changed with Apple's decisions on how they're going to update and remove some of the functionality that it currently exists for the IDFA with privacy concerns being the issue that they're talking about there. And so the UA world of our business is scrambling. Software companies, attribution companies are trying to rethink how they can continue to do the very highly ROI-driven UA plans in the past. Customer care and community are extremely important once we've acquired a player. We want them to be happy. We want them to log in daily. We want them to hopefully like our game so much they tell all their friends about it. And so we put a tremendous amount of responsibility and effort into the post-acquisition, not only the UA, which is pre-acquisition, but the post-acquisition marketing and communication strategies. And so community teams, customer service teams, in-game advocates, in-game help. For instance, in Marvel Strike Force, we have a built-in customer care technology that if somebody has a problem with the game, they can launch and send us a ticket directly from the game app. And our customer care agent will have all sorts of information to be able to help and resolve those issues they might have in the game immediately. We'll know what their level is, how much money they've spent, geographically where they are, and so we don't have to ask a bunch of questions to get down to the root of the issue that the person has. We'll know a lot of that and really shorten the time to resolving a customer's concern. Platform relations is another area that publishers and marketers, especially in the mobile world, are greatly invested in. We have been extremely successful when I was at Fox Next at getting the attention and support of Apple and Google and getting free impressions through featuring opportunities. The same can happen on other distribution platforms, not just mobile. So if you've got a PC game, figuring out how to garner the ear and get attention from Valve to get part of the Steam summer sale, or Epic to try to get distribution on the Epic Game Store, or if you're on a console, how are you trying to advocate for your product to get dashboard presence on the Sony PlayStation Store or the Xbox Store? Platform relations is a great way to get, quote, free advertising, if you will, through featuring on editorial options that the first parties control. Lifecycle and CRM are kind of an extension almost of the customer care and community teams, in that they are there to advocate for, engage with, and retain players once we've acquired them. And so in the mobile world, you have a great luxury through the ability to do automated and some not so automated, maybe custom messages in various ways. We used a software that was built into the game called Braze that allowed us to do our push notification campaigns and our email campaigns. It also had the ability to do in-app communications from our CRM lifecycle marketing teams. You could set up automated triggers based on game state. So if a player hits level 10 and they've just unlocked Spider-Man, we could send them a welcome message and tell them, hey, go watch this video on how to build a team around Spider-Man. He's the great web slinger, and if you build him out this way, you can have a lot of success. These sort of functions are inextricably linked to the product and inextricably linked to the live ops teams. And like I was saying at the very beginning of the discussion, it's really hard to pull these things apart. But in a highly functional Publisher 2020 world, these folks are critical. And finally, because we're talking about games that have long life cycles, we invested in having our own internal creative asset development team that made marketing art. Almost 70% of what these guys were doing, though, we're making assets for the user acquisition team, who are churning through hundreds and thousands of different creative variables on a yearly basis. We, at Fox Next, I think we averaged 5 to 10 completely new creative concepts per week that would go into user acquisition testing. A/B testing, where we'd use data and analytics to find which of the A or B creative was performing best on which platforms and which media outlets, and then taking those learnings, bringing that back to the marketing art team, informing them, hey, this design with this character seems to work well with this audience. Can we make more versions of this? And so on and so forth. The marketing art team also is responsible for fueling the CRM lifecycle and community teams with assets that when the players are outside of the game and they're on your Facebook or your YouTube or your Instagram or your Twitter, we're engaging them with memes or GIFs or small video clips or static art assets that keep them excited about and top of mind. With that, I think I will go ahead and stop and see if there is any questions. I think that what I wanted to be able to convey here, just as a summary, is marketers and publishing teams have radically shifted from working more like blockbuster movie teams, like how a Hollywood film movie would come to feature theaters, and are more similar now, I would expect, to the way a marketing team at HBO or Netflix operates, where they're constantly thinking about ways to engage viewers to log in and watch more content tomorrow, the day after, and day after. And so that is really what I tried to do a lot of research on, and how to take learnings from that industry's transition and apply it to our industry's transition when digital distribution became the norm and games as a service became the norm. So thank you very much.
Thank you too. I think the speech was very interesting, and especially interesting was your topic about how IDFA will affect the UA, user acquisition. So could you please tell us a little bit more about it for the next year?
Yeah. So I'll clarify and say I'm not an expert in UA. I've managed UA teams, and so a lot of my knowledge is secondhand from the professionals that work for me. But I'll tell you the challenges that will exist is most of mobile acquisition right now is based on individual user data. And so the ability to understand at a individual user level habits, spending patterns, playtime information, and using that massive amount of data to send back to media outlets, Facebook being the best example. They're probably the most sophisticated network when you look at the ability to do targeting that is using user level data. That is being threatened by the changes to IDFA. Apple, when they introduce this, will remove the ability to look at user level data. It's still yet to be determined, as far as I know, what their solution is. They've announced something called SK Ad Network, which for the most part has two main challenges that I understand. Number one is it won't be real-time data. And so a lot of these highly advanced user acquisition teams rely on almost instantaneous information to do optimizations on creative type, bids, buy placement, you name it, moment to moment to keep that algorithm fresh. From what I understand, the SK Ad Network will not. It'll be some amount of delay beyond real time, whether that's a day or several days or a week, don't know for sure. The other challenge that I understand with SK Ad Network, in addition to it to not being a user level data, is that they're going to create aggregate groups of customers' data together. And so how they choose to aggregate that is also a challenge. Are they doing that geographically? Are they doing that on a device level? There's a lot of questions on that. And so what we rely on right now is sophisticated attribution technology. So for instance, we used a company called AppsFlyer at Fox Next that would be the code in our UA ads that would allow us to have all of the tracking and the ability to put a user level data information all the way back to be able to do cohort analysis on whether it was a time horizon, so I can look at cohorts that came in today or this week, or geographically look at players that came from Russia or came from the United States, or look at spend levels, you name it. You could slice and dice all these data. Because we had individual users, we could put them properly into their buckets. And so SK Ad Network, if that's a solution, I don't know how they're going to assort and put groups of players or groups of consumers acquired together. So those are some of the challenges that I know.
Right, thank you. So anyways, next year will be great for mobile publishers, I think. Okay, Steve, thank you very much. Thank you for your speech. So I think we will return in a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you.